You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built for us.
Hola.
Hello, this call is being translated.
Abuela, listen to what my phone can do.
Abuela, escucha lo que mi teléfono puede hacer.
Wow. Ahora dime sobre tu novia nueva.
Wow, now tell me about this new girlfriend.
Huh?
Tú sabes lo que dije.
You know what I said.
Language is no longer a barrier thanks to Live Translate with Galaxy AI on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Learn more at Samsung.com. Samsung account login required. Calls must be made using the native Samsung dialer.
Packers fans, it's that time of year. The schedule's out. Let's give a cheer. Green Bay battles, home and away. Tune in now. It's schedule day. Packers podcast, breaking news. Join us now, hear our views. Every game, week by week. Packers fans, come take a peek.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. Well, it's officially schedule release day, so I do want to go over that a little bit today. I want to look at the way that the Packers have things laid out, at least as far as I'm aware of it, as well as the rest of the NFC North, possibly some other rival teams and teams to watch out for through the playoffs. But why don't we get started with week one? That makes sense. We already know, we talked about this a little bit because we had an insight into several games. I know we talked about the Packers, obviously, in Brazil. We knew about 49ers, Jets, and a few others. But, obviously, we got some more information. So we're going to kick it off. Ravens, Chiefs on Thursday. Packers, Eagles on Friday. The Monday game will be Jets, 49ers. That we did know. On Sunday, the Chicago Bears will be at home against the Tennessee Titans. I don't think it was a terrible decision to allow the Bears to be at home. It's going to be a very exciting game. Certainly a winnable game against a struggling football team in the Titans. NFL seemingly trying to set the Bears up for success as best as they possibly can, especially to start the season. You say, well, Tennessee's not great, but isn't their defense pretty good? PFF had their defense ranked 29th last year. It's not Joe Daddy's Tennessee Titans team. So, Will Levis with a really just destroyed offensive line that used to be pretty solid. They went out and got Latham, etc. But then on defense, they still have Landry, who I feel like Harold Landry's been there for 40 years. Turns out it's only been 5. I don't know how that's possible. But he's been their only pass rusher, and he's not good. So, there's a couple pieces maybe that could do something. But if you're wanting to ease Chicago in, you put them at home, you put them against maybe the worst team on their entire schedule, which is the Tennessee Titans. Certainly one of the worst. The only other thing that I could think that you would do is put them up against Minnesota, because then you get that extra oomph, but there's always the fear of it's a divisional game. Even if the Bears end up being a better team, I don't know if this is how you want to start it with, Minnesota probably being with a better head coach and an offensive head coach up against a team that they're kind of familiar with. I know it's a new quarter. I'm just saying. This is probably about best case scenario for Chicago to open up the season if they want to get off to a strong start. Now, if they lose this game, that sucks. The Vikings, likewise, will be going up against the Giants. Now, interestingly enough, the Giants apparently are going to be a part of a new series that starts, I think, July 2nd, I think is when it starts. But it is an off-season total, what the heck is it called? Hard Knocks. So it's like Hard Knocks, but instead of going through the training camp, it's a look at their off-season, which I think is fantastic. I'd love to be able to get a peek into that. The NFL, I've mentioned a lot of things that I think they do wrong. I think leaning into this kind of stuff is a very good idea. Give us as much behind-the-scenes access as possible. If you had 32 teams with 32 different Hard Knockses, I know everybody would be pissed, and the teams would be pissed, but you would make $1 billion, and I would watch all of it. I'd probably watch the Packers season twice. But sticking with the if a little is good, a lot is better philosophy, they're going to have the Giants with their sort of preseason Hard Knocks thing, which would be pretty cool. But the Vikings will be at the New York Giants. As a Packer fan, I see this as relatively negative because we have obviously a sort of tough opponent. I'll get into that in a second. I mean, again, with all the mishaps, really good team, but also what the heck happened. And then you look at, the possibility that the Packers lose. Well, you got the Bears could very easily beat the Titans. I think the Vikings could beat the Giants, who have, one of the worst offensive lines in football, even with John Runyon. Runyon is like their second best offensive lineman right now. Daniel Jones at quarterback. They did get Malik Neighbors, which congratulations and all. Not sure that moves the needle, but, there's that. And then their defense is, outside of Dexter Lawrence, who's an absolute freak on the inside, there's not a whole lot going on here. They acquired Brian Burns, which is nice, but they don't have corners. The interior and exterior outside of Lawrence and Burns are awful. The corners are just terrible. The DBs as a whole are terrible. So a great opening segment for the Vikings. And then you have the Lions and the Rams. This is going to be a primetime game. I don't know if it's Sunday night or Monday night. Oh, it's Sunday night because Monday's Jets 49ers. So really cool slate to have. Again, Chiefs Ravens. You get another primetime game, which is the Packers. Then on Sunday, we get to watch the Bears game, which I'm going to be all in watching that, as well as the Vikings game. And then Sunday night, we have Rams Lions. And then Monday, Jets 49. It's the perfect freaking week one. But again, getting back to what I was saying, the Rams are maybe the only tough-ish team, but the Lions are the one team among them that you kind of feel like is probably going to handle business and win that. And it's in Detroit. So if the Packers do not win, first of all, that's going to be real brutal because it's the only game that day. They're going to be 0-1 in the division, which will be the worst record. And then we watch the Bears march to victory with their new stud, quote-unquote, quarterback. Doesn't really matter how good he actually is. If he leads them to victory over that terrible team, he's going to be hailed, and we're not going to be able to say a freaking thing about it because we just lost. The Vikings beat the Giants. It's entirely possible if the Packers did lose that they're last in the division with the only losing record. Now, at the end of the day, does it really matter? Not really. Every loss counts at the end of the year, but it'll balance out, I guess. But it just, again, I'm happy with it. I'm not mad at the schedule makers or the robot AI thing that has become the schedule maker because I think that this is great, but there's definitely concern here where it's like Lions, Packers, let's make it interesting. And then for Bears and Vikings, let's make it very winnable. It's like, you bastards. Week 2 starts off on Thursday with Bills-Dolphins, another fantastic game. AFC, don't really have to care, but it should be a pretty solid performance. And then on Sunday, the Detroit Lions will be taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You got the sort of reimagined Baker Mayfield, who had a pretty decent year last year. They got Godwin and Evans at wide receiver. They've got some pieces. They're a sort of second-rate playoff team, one of those teams that you look at and go, they're a playoff team, they're not a Super Bowl team kind of thing. That's Tampa. So Detroit, over 2 weeks, not to spend too much time on that, we can kind of revisit it, but in the first 2 weeks, 0-2 is not impossible, 2-0 is not impossible. The Minnesota Vikings, who had it pretty easy week 1, although I'm guessing the Giants will be favorited. It's first of all, it's in, quote unquote, New York. It's an away game for the Vikings, but also I just don't know. I don't know that the Giants just aren't a better team. It's not a. I don't know. But then they have to go play the Minnesota Vikings. Now this is in Minnesota, but I'm actually kind of happy about that because they're not going to win either way. So when one of your home games is a guaranteed L, that's fantastic. If this was an away game, it would be a waste of an away game. So I'm glad this is at home. This is about as guaranteed of an L as you can get. So again, Minnesota, I if I had to guess through 2 weeks, I would actually guess 0-2, but at best they're 1-1. And again, this is kind of where I look at it and say this is where things balance out. Even if it turns out the Packers get the only loss and then it's win-win-win from there, Vikings are at best going to be 1-1, giving the Packers a chance to catch back up. And that wouldn't be the hardest thing in the world to do because it's Colts at Green Bay. So they get a home game after their long trip, which makes sense. And they're going to be going up against the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts are not necessarily a pushover team. I think the biggest question is the quarterback. If Richardson is, if he kind of continues on the path he was on, which, it's such a small sample size, it's really unfair to say he was trash. But 52 grade is not super fantastic. But if he comes out and he's actually looking quite good, this could be scary because they've got a pretty solid running back in Jonathan Taylor. They've got one of the better offensive lines in football. Michael Pittman is a solid receiver. He's one of those low-end number one, high. He's kind of like a lot of our Packers receivers, right? You got sort of that 75-ish PFF grade, and then Josh Downs in the slot is a 70, so kind of a couple Packers receivers there. They got a solid corner in Kenny Moore, and they've got a really solid defensive front, depending on, how guys perform. But as of last year, the grades across the front four, 84, 76, 82, and 74. That's scary. Now, they only have one corner. The rest of the DBs, including the safeties, are really not good. The linebackers also really not very good. But again, it's really going to come down to the quarterback. If they don't have one in Richardson, then it's not really going to matter. And then as for the Chicago Bears, we got a Sunday night game. It's going to be at the Houston Texans. So kind of similar to Minnesota where you got your one opportunity to really jump into the scene and dominate. Week 2, you get, after let's just assume they win, and I am keeping track, by the way. Week 1, I'm going to give everybody wins in the NFC North. We'll revisit this, but just so you're clear, I'm keeping track. I do think the Packers handle business. But Chicago, let's just say that they win week 1 against Tennessee, which I think is certainly possible. You get an entire week of hype. Then you get a national stage to show how elite you are. And you have to go on the road against the Houston Texans. I think the Houston Texans are going to stomp the living daylights out of Chicago. Because the fact of the matter is, as much as everybody wants to talk about Chicago's defense, it's kind of an situation. And you want to talk about Chicago having maybe the best wide receivers in football. I think a very tough competitor, probably actually better, would be the Houston Texans, who do have, I would almost guarantee, a better quarterback. Remember, they brought in Stephon Diggs, the most unbelievably unnecessary thing that has happened, aside from Chicago bringing somebody in. But Stephon Diggs is 30 years old. They bring him in along with Tank Dell, who as a rookie was the 15th highest graded wide receiver with an 83.4 PFF grade, and Nico Collins, who exploded and was the 3rd highest graded wide receiver with a 91.4. So 91, 83, and 79, which means Stephon Diggs was actually the lowest graded of the 3 last year. If you can imagine how crazy that is, on top of CJ Stroud with an 83 PFF grade, Dalton Schultz at tight end with a 71. They brought in Joe Mixon to come in at the running back position, which they already have some pretty decent guys. The offensive line is rough, but I think they've got that. And then borderline better defense. They brought in Danielle Hunter from Minnesota, which is just such an absolute stud move when you've got Will Anderson. Not only do you have the vet on the other side to coach up Will Anderson, but he's just a very good football player. And similar to Stephon Diggs, I think Anderson's going to be better than Hunter. He was last year by a slim margin. You got Derek Stingley, who exploded in year 2. Year 1 looked like it might have been a little rough. Year 2, top 10 corner in the entire NFL. So yeah, I think the Chicago Bears are likely going to come crashing back down to earth. Probably, if I had to guess, tied for last with the Minnesota Vikings in the NFC North. Actually, before we get too far ahead, why don't we look at the Eagles real quick for the Week 1 matchup? Since we're kind of going through the teams for the rest of the NFC North, we might as well look at the Philadelphia Eagles. So I've already made it clear how I feel about the Fangio defense, right? I think there's still a lot of hype for the defense, especially for Fangio himself. It's possible that last year was a fluke, but again, if you haven't heard me say it, there wasn't a single good Vic Fangio defense in the NFL last year. There were, 5, 6, 7 of them? I went through every single one of them. Fangio was, I think, the best, quote-unquote, Fangio defense, and he was ranked somewhere right in the middle, 13th, 14th, 15th, somewhere in there. They were all some of the worst defenses in the entire NFL. The Eagles have adopted that now. Still a relatively scary team. They lost their center, which is massive, but they still have Jalen Hurts. They've got good tackles. The interior is getting a little bit rough. They do have A.J. Brown, fantastic wide receiver, and then they've got Devontae Smith, who's pretty solid. Dallas Goedert is a decent tight end. They brought in Saquon Barkley. I'm really not very scared of him. And then defensively, they're trying to keep that thing going, but the Eagles just feel like this old team that's starting to fall apart, and they're not replacing as fast as they should. They bring in guys like Darius Slay, who, come on, man. But the defensive line is comprised of some pretty decent pieces, but, it's still being propped up by 36-year-old Brandon Graham. That's ridiculous. So that's going to be going away fairly soon. Josh Sweat is not very good. They've got Jalen Carter, who is a elite football player on the interior. Bryce Huff seems pretty decent off the edge, but that's kind of it. Those two guys. Again, Brandon Graham might still be elite at 36 years old, but, outside of the defensive front, their corners are terrible. Their linebackers are terrible. Reed Blankenship is a decent safety. Outside of that, not much. But the larger thing here is we got to remember the Philadelphia Eagles were 11-6 last year, which isn't terrible, but they were 10-1 to start the season. They lost to the 49ers, lost to the Cowboys, lost to the Seahawks, beat the Giants, garbage, lost to the Cardinals, lost to the Giants, then went into the playoffs because of what had happened before, and got annihilated by the Buccaneers. They were maybe the worst team in football starting around week 13. They lost 19-42 to the 49ers. They lost 33-13 to the Cowboys. They lost 20-17 to the Seahawks. Beat the Giants by 7, so one score. They lost to the Cardinals 35-31 and lost to the Giants 27-10, and then they went to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and lost 32-9. So when I talk about the Eagles, that's the only thing that's in the back of my mind. This might be a horrifically bad football team, and a lot of it is the defense. They ended up ranking 30th on defense, 26th defensively in terms of yards. But I'm not going to pretend their offense is good. In that stretch, they scored 19, 13, 17, and then 33, 31, and then it was 10-9. So outside of the Giants and the Cardinals, they scored 19, 13, 17, 10, and 9. That offense was garbage down the stretch. And the defense was bad, since, the Washington game week 8, 31-23, and then 17, 34, 42, 33, 20, 25, 35, 27, 32. It's just a bad football team, period. So unless somebody can look at that and just say, well, yeah, obviously because, this was the reason and now they're going to be all fixed. Jalen Hurts was the quarterback, right? Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, they were out there on the field with Jalen Hurts, right? When they lost in the playoffs 32-9 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Eagles scored 0 points in 3 out of 4 quarters. They scored 9 in the second quarter. And they got 9 because they kicked a field goal and then got a touchdown and failed on the 2-point conversion. That's how they got 9. They give up 10, 6, 9, and 7 to the Buccaneers through 4 quarters. The Buccaneers scored as many or more points in two individual quarters than the Eagles scored the entire game. So yeah, I've got the Packers going 2-0 to start the season. And I don't know that the Eagles wouldn't be the easier of the two games, to be honest. And by the way, this is where, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get to it today because of the pace that I'm going at right now. This is where I look at things like strength of schedule. It's like, oh, the Packers got one of the toughest schedules. And a big part of that is because of games like Philadelphia. Oh, it's an away game against Philadelphia. That's tough. Well, it's a neutral field game against maybe one of the worst teams in football, depending on if they fixed whatever issue they had, like the entire second half of the season. Just because their record set 11-6, who gives a crap? That's not indicative of the football team. When you look at their record and the Packers' record and going into the playoffs, you would think that the Eagles are a significantly better football team, and it was the exact opposite. The Packers are one of the best teams in football. The Eagles are one of the worst. But we just blindly look at a stupid record. Anyways, moving on now to week 3. Thursday game, we have Patriots-Jets. This is the first time I couldn't care less about, the Thursday game. Sunday rolls around. We have Lions-Cardinals, which is very likely going to be another win for the Lions. I have very little respect for the Cardinals. We have Bears-Colts. Already went over the Colts. I don't know. I mean, it kind of comes down to Richardson. As I said, I hate to do it, but I'll just give it to Chicago because I'm kind of leaning positive for as many teams as possible. Then the Minnesota Vikings take their turn with Houston. Sorry, Minnesota, that's another L. And then the Green Bay Packers take their turn with the Tennessee Titans, and this is going to be on the road. And again, I don't have a massive amount of respect for the Tennessee Titans. We'll see what happens. But I just, aside from a couple pieces here and there, meh. So as it stands, I've got Green Bay and Detroit at 3-0. I've got Chicago at 2-1, Minnesota at 1-2 to start the season. Why don't we take our first break? We'll come back, pick up the pace a little bit, go through the rest of the schedule, and finish up our sort of preliminary, off the top of the head, slightly positive leaning record predictions. We'll be right back. We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built for us. In the hobby, it's not easy being a fan of ripping packs or repacks. We get all hyped up thinking we're going to get some high-value Jordan Love card, but with zero transparency on available cards and hit rates, it's all just a shot in the dark. Until now, introducing slab packs from arenaclub.com, the only repack that provides real value, a complete view on all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Now when I buy slab packs on Arena Club, it finally feels like I know what I'm getting. And honestly, the best thing for me and my son is the fact that we're kind of novices into this. When I walk into a card shop with my son, and a card says it costs $40, kind of just taking his word for it that that's a good value. So I appreciate the transparency on grading, as well as just getting excited about seeing what you could potentially get. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase by going to arenaclub.com/packdaddy. Wow, that's crazy offer. 10% off a $400 slab pack. That's $40 right there. Anyways, that's arenaclub.com/packdaddy for 10% off your first purchase.
Hola.
Hello, this call is being translated.
Abuela, listen to what my phone can do.
Abuela, escucha lo que mi teléfono puede hacer.
Wow. Ahora dime sobre tu novia nueva.
Wow, now tell me about this new girlfriend.
Huh?
Tú sabes lo que dije.
You know what I said.
Language is no longer a barrier thanks to Live Translate with Galaxy AI on Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Learn more at Samsung.com. Samsung account login required. Calls must be made using the native Samsung dialer.
Allstate wants to remind fans that mayhem is everywhere. Like when your fantasy league meets up at your house. Everything's great until the hot plate gets too hot for the tablecloth. Now your kitchen's up in smoke. And if you don't have the right home insurance coverage, the cost to fix this is anything but a fantasy. So switch to Allstate, save money, and get protected from mayhem like this. Not available in every state based on coverage selected, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Savings vary.
All right, rounding out the first quarter of the season in week 4 now. We've got the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday Night Football. It looks like it's going to be at Giants. I wish this was going to be somewhat... I mean, it's cool because it's a rivalry game, but it sucks because Dallas is probably just going to stomp the living crap out of the Giants. Then on Sunday, we have the Chicago Bears playing the Los Angeles Rams. Look, I want to lean somewhat positive, but I'm sorry, I can't take a team that has an established quarterback. I'm not saying elite, but established. He's a good quarterback that went to the playoffs and just say the Bears are going to beat them because despite the fact that they've sucked forever, they went out and drafted a guy that nobody knows anything about, and now they're going to be great. I can't do it. So, very sorry about that. The Green Bay Packers are going to be playing the Minnesota Vikings, so we got our first division game going on. Real excited about that. It's going to be at Green Bay. So, it's pretty cool. We go to Brazil, then we get to come home, then we're on the road, and then we come home and play the Vikings. So we got 2 home games and a Brazil game in the first 4 weeks. I really like that. Plus, when we get to settle back home again this time, it's against the Minnesota Vikings, and I have zero reason to believe that anything else is going to happen except the Vikings are going to get the crap beat out of them. That puts Detroit, after a Week 1 victory, on a 3-game losing streak. Green Bay goes to 4-0. Chicago has a win-loss thing going on, so they're sitting at 2-2. Bears fans are already starting to feel the effects of reality crushing down on them slightly. Detroit has a Monday night game. So they already had a Sunday night Week 1. Now they got a Monday night. There's actually 2 Monday night games this week. We got the Titans at Dolphins, and we have Seahawks at Lions. I wish I could pull for the Seahawks here, playoff team, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, maybe Geno looked solid, like Baker Mayfield solid. They've got Metcalf and Lockett, and maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba takes a step. Who knows? The offensive line is horrific. They got a solid running back in Walker. Defense is kind of rebuilding, which is great for Seattle. Got a couple guys on the defensive line. They got some decent corners. They had the number 1 ranked linebacker, but it kind of seems a little bit fluky. And then the safeties are rough. But it's a maybe situation, but I can't. I got to give it to Detroit, bringing them also to 4-0. So that this by week 4. It's very obviously a 2-man race. Chicago fans and everybody else will be fighting and say, well, yeah, blah, 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 maybe, who knows. Caleb needs to figure something out. It's the 1-3 Vikings, the 2-2 Bears, and then the 2 4-0 Packers and Detroit Lions teams. And as much as it feels homerish to do this, I think the Lions of either team, the Lions have a much more difficult start to the season. Again, I think the Green Bay Packers schedule of Philadelphia, who was garbage last year, Indy, who I don't even think has a quarterback, Tennessee, likewise, pretty bad football team, and Minnesota, who's terrible. I mean, that should be 4-0. It really should. If anybody's not going to be 4-0, it's going to be Detroit, because they've got the Rams in primetime week 1. That's not a walk in the park. You've got Tampa, who is a playoff team. You've got Arizona, who knows? And then you've got Seattle, which is a borderline team. In fact, I feel like I have to throw an L in here somewhere. That's a 4-game stretch that has an L in it. The benefit for Detroit is that 3 of those 4 are at home. It's at home against the Rams, and it's at home against the teams that I give a crap about, Seattle, Tampa Bay, and LA, with the Arizona Cardinals just being a team that I think is stupid. Although, Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Maybe Kyler Murray with Marvin Harrison. I don't know. But no, that's not going to be the one. I think we're going to do week 1 primetime against the Rams. Stafford was the 5th highest graded quarterback. Puka Nacua was top 10. Cooper Kupp's still decent. I think that's what I'm going to do. Week 5, the Detroit Lions get a relatively early bye. You could maybe view that as a good thing for Detroit if they see this as kind of a bit of a gauntlet here. But usually early bye is not the best thing in the world for anybody. But the Thursday game will be Tampa and Atlanta, so another division game. It'll be semi-interesting, I suppose. And then on Sunday, we've got the Minnesota Vikings will be actually traveling to England to play the Jets. Pretty excited about that game. Aaron Rodgers versus the Vikings has some appeal to it, in my opinion. I saw somebody talking about, this is the best team Rodgers has played for, blah, 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 blah. However, assuming Aaron Rodgers is healthy and can play at a decent level, he's got, hopefully, for his sake, at least decent tackles this year. He's got a decent running back. He's got a couple decent wide receivers in, Mike Williams they brought over. They've got, of course, Garrett Wilson is still there. Now, Garrett Wilson did take a big step back. That's worth noting. Now, maybe it's because Rodgers was gone, although Rodgers wasn't there in year 1. But, Garrett Wilson was like the most elite guy in the world. He ranked 12th, which is pretty solid. This past year, 43rd. So, when Mike Williams is 30 years old. You know, he's never really been a top 10 guy. He's decent, but not really top 10. So you got the older vet boundary guy in Williams. You got Garrett Wilson, who we'll see. And then Alan Lazard is your other wide receiver, of course. But the real strength, obviously, is going to be the defense, where you've got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you've got DJ Reed at corner, you've got some just dominant defensive front guys, you got maybe the best linebacking group in football. Bottom line, the Jets should handle business and hopefully get the job done against the Minnesota Vikings. Please, Rodgers, fingers crossed, help us out. That, by the way, would be a 4-game losing skid. Chicago will be playing Carolina. I can't really put any lipstick on that pig. Carolina is what they are. They are incompetent morons. They are the gift that keeps on giving to the Chicago Bears. Please, Carolina, if nothing else, stop doing business with Chicago, please. If you could just do that. Even if the Bears quarterback isn't good, Bryce Young is terrible. He's maybe the worst quarterback in football. The offensive line isn't good. They don't have much by way of wide receivers. They did go out and get Jonathan Brooks, which is great, but that's not going to be enough. They don't have much. It's a terrible football team. So I have to give it to the Bears. And then Green Bay gets probably one of their toughest games up to that point, which is going to be the LA Rams. We'll see what kind of shape Stafford is in, but he, again, solid football player last year. I still think the Packers should get the job done. I think the other issue is that I'm looking at the schedule and I'm seeing one loss, so I feel like I got to put a loss in here somewhere else. Probably have to split with Detroit and maybe do Miami or something. I don't know, but either way, I think the Packers are hands down the better football team. I don't really think it's massively debatable. I mean, especially since they usually beat the crap out of the Rams. So that would put the Green Bay Packers at 5-0, Detroit at 3-1, Chicago at 3-2, and Minnesota at 1-4. Which, again, the other negative about a bye week is that now that Detroit can't take another step forward, it allows Chicago to come up and tie in terms of wins. So now it's like, oh, look, Green Bay is the clear leader of the NFC North, and then it's Chicago or Detroit, and then it's Minnesota, and Detroit fans are like, no, no, it's not Chicago or Detroit, it's us or Green Bay. You all shut up. But that's how it goes. Week 6, it's Minnesota's turn to have a bye. Chicago's turn to go to England. They will be playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. That one's a little bit more interesting. I mean, it's kind of the Jaguars' home stomping grounds at this point. I don't know if they're any good in England or not. I'm not going to bother to look it up. But, you look at Trevor Lawrence, and you feel the similarities in terms of just this elite. We've never seen a quarterback like him before. And then he comes in, and he's okay. He's fine. He's nowhere near what everybody thought he would be. Got some decent wide receivers. Okay enough offensive line, kind of similar to the Bears. Travis Etienne is a solid running back. They did bring in Brian Thomas, so they also have a rookie wide receiver. They got Allen off the edge, who's probably the best pass rusher between the two. Also got Eric Armstead on the interior, who's better than anyone the Bears have on the interior. Got good linebackers. They've got some, funny enough, the guy that I don't know if PFF messed this up or if this has been declared, their slot corner is actually one of their highest graded guys. It's Darnell Savage, who had a 75.5 PFF grade last year. But I don't know, man. I think I'm going to give it to the Jaguars. I don't know if I'm being petty or not. Probably a little bit. But, I know what the Jaguars are. I have no idea what the Bears are. I'm not going to give them credit for what they haven't proved yet. Plus, we got a really nice pattern going with win-loss, win-loss, win-loss. I'd hate to mess that up. Detroit, week 6, is going up against Dallas. This is where it gets real spicy, man, because you look at this now, and if they drop this to Dallas, which is entirely possible, and Green Bay's playing Arizona, which is a W, do I dare? I think I do dare. If they lose to Dallas and Green Bay wins, which is going officially in my chart here, the Packers are now 6-0, doubling the next best team, which would be Detroit and Chicago, who each have 3 wins through this point. Chicago's 3-3, Detroit is 3-2, and Minnesota is 1-4. Then we get to week 7, and it is Chicago's turn for a bye. So we got Detroit, then Minnesota, then Chicago going 1-2-3 with the byes. By the way, Thursday is going to be Denver and New Orleans, so we've just given up on Thursday. Detroit and Minnesota are going to play each other, which is, great aside from the part where Detroit gets an auto win. But really, Minnesota and Chicago can't win. Green Bay has got a heck of a showdown here with the Houston Texans. So we know with Chicago's bye and Detroit beating Minnesota, the rest of the NFC North, Chicago's 3-3, Minnesota's 1-5, Detroit is 4-2. Green Bay, though, up against the Houston Texans. The good news, and this is what I decided to let the 50-50 come down to in my mind before I looked at it, who's at home? The answer, the Green Bay Packers. So I am going to put that in the win column. If it was in Houston, I would have gone the other direction. But that's going to be probably the toughest game up to that point. That will put the Green Bay Packers at 7-0. Even if they lose, it's 6-1. They're still in very heavy command of the NFC North. Week 8, finally everybody's back from a bye week. Minnesota Vikings will get the Thursday night game against the LA Rams. So that's, sorry, Minnesota, but the Rams are going to beat you. That puts the Vikings on a 6-game slide, having not won a game since week 1. It's actually 7 weeks, 6 games with the bye week. Detroit's going up against Tennessee, so that should be a win. The question here comes down to Chicago versus Washington. And as much as I'm sure Bears fans would say that's an auto win, why? They got Jaden Daniels. You're telling me you know that Jaden Daniels is going to be a worse quarterback? How do you know? Maybe he's a significantly better quarterback. Maybe you got Bryce Young and they got C.J. Stroud. You don't know. I think they have a better offensive line. Bears have better receivers. Defense probably leans Chicago since, again, Washington kind of got rid of everybody. So I will lean Chicago, but this comes down 100% to which quarterback is better. If it's Daniels, then Washington wins. But I'll give it to Chicago. They got the quarterback first. They have probably a better supporting cast. And then the Green Bay Packers are going to be going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Certainly a formidable foe, and it is in Florida, which I know freaks a bunch of people out. Starting to get a little bit late in the season, so I doubt it's going to be 100 degrees, but I have no reason not to put this in the win column for Green Bay based on where we're at so far. Week 9, the Bears are at San Francisco. That's an L. Detroit is at Green Bay. I'll split with Detroit, but this is in Green Bay, so that's a win for Green Bay. Minnesota going up against Indy. Honestly, just out of pity, I'm going to give the Vikings a win. So Green Bay will go to 9-0. Chicago with a loss is going to go to 4-4. Minnesota with a pity win is going to go to 2-6. And Detroit, with a loss against Green Bay, falls to 5-3. So right now it's 9-0, 5-3, 4-4. Chicago nipping at the heels of Detroit. Green Bay running away with it, and Minnesota expectedly in the basement at 2-6. Week 10, the Packers finally get their bye, so their undefeated streak cannot go away, although it's going to start getting tough out of the other side of this. Minnesota is going to face Jacksonville. I mean, I could give them another pity one, but I'm not going to. I think Jacksonville is a better football team. New England against Chicago. Ugh. I mean, again, it's a quarterback thing. They got Drake May. They have, I believe, a better offensive line. The defense probably goes to the Patriots. Wide receivers, again, probably going to be the Bears. I want to give it to New England so badly, but I'm going to apply the same logic, and because it's in Chicago, I'll give it to Chicago. And then Detroit's going to have the Sunday night game at Houston. I'm going to apply the same logic I did with when we played Houston, except we had them at home, they have them on the road. Houston gets the win in prime time. By the way, it would be their second Sunday night football loss out of the 2 that they've played. Then week 11, Chicago versus Green Bay. That's a Green Bay win. Detroit's going against Jacksonville. That's a Detroit win. Minnesota against Tennessee. I'll give them another pity win for fun. So everybody wins, except the Bears. All just normal Sunday games, nothing super crazy there. Packers sit at 10-0. Detroit 6-4. Chicago 5-5, right on their heels. Minnesota 3-7. Maybe I should give Detroit their win back since I was so worried about they need a win in here somewhere. They've gone 3-3 since their bye week. Anyways, carrying on. Don't care. Chicago Bears take on Minnesota. That's a win for Chicago. Detroit gets their Indy game, so that's a win. The Packers are they are at home against San Francisco. I got to give them a loss somewhere. That's going to be a loss for Green Bay. And then, obviously, Chicago, Minnesota. So, week 13, we've got the Thanksgiving games, and 3 out of the 4 teams will be playing on Thanksgiving. Detroit and Chicago are going to play each other, and then Green Bay is going to play Miami. Chicago and Miami will be at home. Sorry, Chicago, I'm giving it to Detroit. So Detroit wins, Chicago loses. Green Bay, I'm going to have winning against the Miami Dolphins. I don't like Arizona, but I still have them beating Minnesota. Now, you might be saying, why do you just automatically beat my... Well, nothing's automatic, first of all. But do I think Jordan's better than Tua? I think I do. Do they have better wide receivers? Yes, they do. I think the Packers are going to win with offensive line, with tight end. Man, you know what? This is going to be a pretty tough one. I'm trying to look where the Packers win, and it's like there's not as many automatics as I thought. So Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were almost both top 5 wide receivers. Both of them had elite grades. It's hard to give the Packers the wide receiver edge. Even the offensive line edge is kind of iffy, but I'm going to give it to the Packers. Quarterback edge is certainly iffy, with Tua ranking 7th last year. Running back, I'd love to give to the Packers, but Raheem Mostert was 5th last year. I'd love to say we have better corners because 2 out of their 3 starters are not super great, although that's the same situation with Green Bay. And their number 1 corner, Fuller, ranked 7th. I'd like to say we have a better defensive line, but the 4 along their defensive line had an 89, 69, 80, and 73 grades. I mean, that's pretty good. One of their linebackers had a 70 grade, which, I mean, that's about where we're at. They had one of the best safeties in football. I don't know, man. Fine, I'll give the Packers an L. I think the Packers will probably win it, but I can't rationally come to that conclusion. It is in Green Bay, though. Yeah, screw it. Packers win. Sorry, suck it. Packers are really lucking out with their home and away thing because it's like the teams that I am scared of so far. You got Detroit. Obviously, we're going to do both. But so far, Detroit, that was at home. San Francisco, that was at home. Miami, that was at home. Houston, that was at home. Really hope home field advantage is a big benefit because we're going to need it. Anyways, let's take a break. We'll finish this out and see what we end up with. We got, 5 games left? We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
This summer, click into cordless power with Memorial Day savings at the Home Depot. Tackle more than half an acre of grass with the convenience and gas-like power of the Ryobi 40-volt battery-powered mower. And keep your flower beds fresh with the 40-volt cordless string trimmer. Then clear debris with the 40-volt jet fan leaf blower. Click into Memorial Day savings happening now at your cordless power source, the Home Depot. How doers get more done.
This episode is brought to you by Vital Farms. Isn't it bullshit to have to question where your food comes from? At Vital Farms, you can trace your pasture-raised eggs all the way back to the source, the pasture. On the side of each pasture-raised carton of eggs, you'll find the name of the farm where your eggs were laid. And when you look the farm up on their website, you'll get a peek at all the sunshine, fresh air, and open space the hens enjoy. Learn more and find out where to buy them at vitalfarms.com. Vital Farms, keeping it bullshit-free.
Today, healthier is happening at CVS Health in more ways than you've ever seen. It's wellness destinations for seniors, including select locations of Oak Street Health and CVS Pharmacy. It's doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and everyone in between, offering quality care and support virtually, in person, and on the phone. It's in-home evaluations through Signify Health and meeting mental health needs through Aetna. And those are just a few of the ways healthier is happening. To see more, visit cvshealth.com/healthier happens together. CVS Pharmacy, Oak Street Health, CVS Specialty, Signify Health, and Aetna are part of CVS Health. Eligibility and services vary by location and individual.
Looking to invest? Start your journey by exploring exchange-traded funds with Global X ETFs. Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs for short, create baskets of stocks, bonds, and other assets that you can buy in a single trade. Global X specializes in ETFs that track emerging trends, like the rise of artificial intelligence, as well as strategies aimed to generate income potential. Visit globalxetfs.com to discover how you can get started.
All right, week 14, Thursday night football is going to be Green Bay and Detroit. So this is back-to-back Thursday night games for the Green Bay Packers and for the Detroit Lions, which is funny enough. This one's going to be at Detroit, so I'm going to give this one to Detroit, like I said. Chicago will be playing Arizona. I'll just give it to Chicago. And then Atlanta and Minnesota, going to be a fantastic game where Kirk Cousins is going to come back to Minnesota and beat the crap out of you in your own stadium. Now, this is where everyone's going to start to get heart palpitations because Detroit is on a 4-game win streak. Green Bay is 2-2 in that stretch with probably a close win against Miami. But again, it's nothing's changed. It's the same person looking at the same teams coming to the same conclusions. The only thing that's changed is that the Packers' schedule has gotten a little bit tougher. But Green Bay sitting at 11-2, and you've got Detroit at 9-2, Chicago at 7-6, starting to create a little bit of distance there, and then Minnesota at 3-10. Week 15, we've got the Chicago Bears at Minnesota. That's going to be the Chicago Bears. Detroit's playing Buffalo. That's kind of a tough one. What is Buffalo now that they don't have their top wide receiver anymore? They still got Josh Allen, who was graded as number 1 last year. Decent enough offensive line. Okay wide receivers. And it is going to be in Detroit. I'm going to give it to Buffalo, but I think there's a very good chance Detroit wins that game. I just don't feel like continuing to give them their 5th win in a row. This is very scientific. Look, this is mostly just supposed to be a schedule reveal. We're doing the record thing for fun, so just leave me alone. Do what I want. If I'm not having fun, then why are we doing it? And I have more fun when Detroit loses. So Chicago beats Minnesota, Buffalo beats Detroit, and then the Green Bay Packers will be playing Sunday Night Football at the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, you got to travel and whatnot, but I'm not super scared of Seattle, like I've mentioned before, so I'm going to give that one to the Packers. So that gap now with the Detroit Lions losing and the Bears winning, once again starting to close. The Packers pull away to 12-2, Chicago at 8-6, Detroit at 9-5, Minnesota at 3-11. Coming up on Week 16, this is the Christmas. No, that's next week. All right, so this week, Chicago and Detroit. I am going to give that to Detroit because I just think they're better. It is in Chicago, but I don't care. I'm not having them split. Minnesota is going to be playing Seattle. Don't really respect Seattle, but I do so more so than Minnesota. The Green Bay Packers are going to be playing New Orleans. So you got Carr and Kamara with Olave, Cedric Wilson, Shaheed. The offensive line is really starting to fall apart. Trevor Penning is starting to look like he might have been a little bit of a miss, although he missed half the season, although that's part of the problem, I guess. Defensively, I don't think they're necessarily the powerhouse they were, but they still got some pieces there. It kind of feels like Philadelphia, where they had this really good defense, and it's falling apart, and you want to discount them, but they still have some of those really dominant pieces. But anyways, Packers win that game. So we've got Green Bay and Detroit winning, Chicago and Minnesota losing. Green Bay goes to 13-2. Detroit gets to 10-5. As much as I feel like I've been, disrespectful to Detroit, we got 2 weeks left, and they're at 10-5. I mean, they're a lock playoff team at this point. It's almost the exact opposite of what usually Lions fans do to Green Bay. They're like, Lions win 14, Green Bay wins 11. And you look at it and you want to be pissed, but you're like, no, all right, no, that's fine. You gave us 11 wins. That's showing a lot of respect from a rivalry, especially any one of the NFC North teams' fan bases toward the Green Bay Packers, because the hatred is so deep. So it's just that in reverse. Week 17. This is the Christmas week. For reference, we've got Kansas City playing Pittsburgh. We've got Houston and Baltimore. That'll be a good game. We have... Is that it? I thought there were 3. Maybe that's next year. So there's 2 Christmas games. Let's see. Might as well go with the rest of them. Sunday night is Miami, Cleveland. Thursday night, Seattle, Chicago. Monday is Detroit, San Francisco. So we got a couple primetime games here in the NFC North. So again, Thursday, the Chicago Bears play Seattle. I don't know, man. I don't care for Seattle. But at the same time, Geno has at least demonstrated to be a top 15 quarterback. They've got a couple wide receivers who have proven to be very good. Now, yes, DJ Moore has proven it in Chicago. Keenan Allen has not and is very aged. And the rookie we know nothing about. Should I be unfair? I think I will be unfair. Wait, who are the Bears? So the Bears play Green Bay, so that's going to be a loss. You know what? I'll give them a win. I'll get them to 9. That way, I don't want to hear any Bears fans crying. You get your 9 wins. I think that's semi-respectable. So Chicago does beat Seattle, and that's prime time. That's Thursday. Bears fans feeling good, feeling themselves and all that. You got your prime time victory over a potentially playoff team. This is going to be in Chicago, so the home crowd going to be happy. Then we have Green Bay versus Minnesota. as the Week 17 matchup. That's just absolute beautiful gloriousness. It's going to be in Minnesota. I don't give a crap. That's a win for Green Bay, a loss for Minnesota. And as I said, on Monday night, then we have Detroit, San Francisco. That is a loss for Detroit. Thank you, San Francisco. It's also in San Francisco. I feel like the Packers are getting the upper hand here, where all these, again, you look at Houston, Green Bay gets them at home. Detroit gets Houston in Houston. San Francisco, Green Bay gets them at home. I still have it as a loss, but still at home. Detroit gets it in San Francisco. Very similar schedules, but they made it quite a bit harder, seemingly, for Detroit, just with the tough games on the road. So I have that as a loss for Detroit. So that puts Green Bay at 14-2. Detroit still at 10-6. Chicago Bears get to 9-7, and Minnesota sits at 3-13, which actually isn't that crazy because I've heard several people say they're a 4-win team, which I haven't really thought about it much, but it kind of feels right, and we're right about that. Again, I'm just kind of screwing around, but as I look at the numbers, yes, 14-2 is a little silly. I get that. That's probably a little high. Everything else, though, feels kind of right. Let's assume some of these semi-tough games, plus maybe not tough games that are going to be fluky, ends up being losses for Green Bay. But Chicago at 9, Minnesota at 3 or 4, we'll see where it goes, or Detroit at 10 or 11. It's believable. Week 18. Green Bay, Chicago, that will go to Green Bay. It's in Green Bay. And then Detroit and Minnesota will play each other. This is in Detroit. So this is pretty straightforward how this is going to go down. All right, so all told, the Green Bay Packers start off, first of all, with a 9-game win streak before their bye week. Then after their bye week, they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-2 to end 15-2. Well, not end at 15-2. It ends with a Super Bowl victory, but the regular season ends at 15-2. Detroit Lions do make it to 11-6, which I think is a very feasible and respectable record. They will certainly sail into the playoffs with that. Chicago probably just misses at 9-8. Minnesota sitting at a paltry 3-14. Again, these kind of prediction things are obviously ridiculous because teams are going to lose to teams they shouldn't. Teams are going to beat teams they shouldn't. Some teams are going to be significantly better or worse than was expected, but it's fun anyways. I think we'll get into strength of schedule tomorrow. I don't have a ton to say about it. I just kind of want to get a little bit of brain fry going through all this stuff, and I've been waiting all day. I like to get this stuff done sooner. My brain is less fried, but I'm going to leave it at that. We'll take a little gander at that tomorrow. You guys have a good rest of your day. I will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.